Now we have Professor Stuart Rees, who's kindly come along to say a few words in defence of Julian's situation.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Adriana and others for inviting me to come. I'm going to talk briefly about two things. One is the notion of cruelty, and the other is what I call a language for humanity. The issue really is about cruelty coupled to cowardice. The appalling cruelty of an American government that seeks revenge on anyone who exposes the truth about the murder and mayhem that they committed in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a cruelty that you can see that nurtured a secret jury for nearly 6 years trying to concoct charges against Julian Assange in some building in Virginia. A cruelty that's become central to the domestic and foreign policies of so many governments, but not acknowledged. There's the cruelty of the compliant British government, which parades and has for years the notion of justice before us. I've spent part of my career in and out of the very court that Julian is appearing in this morning, the Central Criminal Court in London, known as the Old Bailey. For the most part, it is about a theatre of the absurd, which is paraded as justice. The rules of law, in some ways, are used as a camouflage for what is really happening. Again, it's about revenge against somebody who exposed the cruelty of the establishment, a cruelty that demanded that Julian should have something like 5 or 6 times as long in jail for skipping bail as any normal skipper of bail. A cruelty that allowed the British government to be persuaded by the government of Sweden, they're all compliant, that he should be arrested, taken from the Ecuadorian embassy and put in Belmarsh for the past year.
Bogus charges.
On completely bogus charges. It's great to have somebody giving me the script to my right. If you've got any more brilliant ideas, I'll adopt them. But it's also
not just cruelty, sir.
Yeah.
It's also crimes of public officials.
I'm coming to that. That's the last point I was going to make. It's okay. It's also, look, let's be clear, it's the cruelty and the cowardice, with some exceptions like Andrew Wilkie, of the people in the government in Canberra. The deference to America, the deference to the British government shown by the cowards in Canberra is a blot on the public record of Australia. Again, it's camouflaged by an institution called DFAT, in which we are constantly assured that Australians in trouble will receive all the support necessary from the Consulate of Australia. It appears in retrospect to mean almost nothing. So that the failure of Australian government officials to speak up for David Hicks, for Julian Assange, or for the people imprisoned in Israeli jails for fear of offending Israel or the American establishment. I don't think the two are any different. I mean, whether Israel determines American foreign policy or America determines Israeli policy, I've very little idea. So the cruelty is central to the domestic and foreign policies of the United States, the United Kingdom, and unfortunately, cowardly Australia. Frequently when I go to Canberra, I try to persuade politicians that a touch of courage would be good for their mental and physical health. That they should take the risk of standing on principle, because I've said to them, look, it would be good for you. You should try it. It's almost better. It's better than an aspirin. Now, the final points I want to make concern what I call the language of humanity, a language for humanity. And your presence here today and what I heard Father Dave's saying, is about a language for humanity. It's about the language of humane governance. We're here in a way to plea not merely for Julian's immediate release and return home, but for a sense of humane governance that would deal with all the human rights abuses that have led to the taken for granted attitudes towards his imprisonment. And we have to have this language, because if we don't have the language, we can't envision a better post-COVID socially just future. It's also the language of human rights. That doesn't mean deference to law, but that means the struggle to express human rights in every possible context, every day. It's what the wonderful German poet Bertolt Brecht called the bread of justice, and he said justice was the bread of the people, and just as daily bread is necessary, so is daily justice. And then he added, it is even necessary several times a day. But the language of humanity is also about redefining what we understand by politics. Again, we need to persuade the people who enter politics that they must learn to know how to use power in a life-enhancing and non-destructive way. Not the kind of bullying, imprisonment, punishment for all time mentality that has seen Chelsea Manning chronically abused by the Americans and Julian also locked up. But the language of humanity is also about it's about the language, the philosophy and the practice of non-violence. Again, it's something that's not because what we're seeing is Julian the victim of a taken for granted assumption that mine has to be bigger than yours, that we have to be, and you know, I can see some grins going around, because certainly it's got sexual connotations. You know, when I witnessed the fascination in theocracies for flogging people, the idea that it's got I'm diverting a bit, the idea that it's got a religious connotation is a complete nonsense. There's something else going on there. But the language and practice of non-violence is what Mahatma Gandhi tried to teach us, was not only a way of living, but a law for life. And if that was even slightly observed, Julian wouldn't be appearing before the Old Bailey at this moment. And the final point I want to make, and it's when an old academic uses the word final, people usually breathe a sigh of relief, because that means that what they're saying is coming to an end. Except that some academics say finally about 6 times, and 20 minutes later you're still there. Don't worry, don't worry. The final point I want to make about the language of humanity, it's about the language of interdependence, the interdependence of all people around the world. We shouldn't have to go back to a 16th century English poet, John Donne, to know that no man or woman is an island or law unto themselves. We didn't really need COVID-19 virus to teach us that the idea of national sovereignty is absurd. And that interdependence shows that, and each of you here know this very well, that we are all affected by the massive injustice to Julian Assange. That we are all the lesser for not standing up to say he should be free. And in a way, a wonderful indigenous poet, Ujuru Nunukul, wrote about this with enormous foresight 70 years ago in a poem called All One Race. I'm for humankind, not colour jibes. I'm international, never mind tribes. I'm international, never mind place. I'm for Julian Assange, all one race. And that's the last time I'm going to say final.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Emeritus Professor Stuart Reyes.